Hey, this is April, and this show, SetSet Show, discusses cannabis, psychedelics, and altered states of consciousness generally. It's intended for audiences 21 and over. Also, I am not a medical expert. If you are looking to engage with psychedelic substances, please consult your physician before doing so. Welcome back. I'm April Pride, your host of SetSet Show, a resource for everyone curious to safely explore the use of cannabis and psychedelics for their clinically proven therapeutic potential and beyond. If you like what we share on this show, please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. Today, I'm joined by Kaia Roman, author of The Joy Plan, as she shares her personal journey with ketamine therapy during a challenging time in her life. In our conversation, Kaia opens up about how ketamine played a crucial role in helping her manage the emotional impact of divorce, stress, and anxiety, its unique effects on the brain, and why it's different from traditional antidepressants. Now join me as we uncover the science and story behind ketamine therapy with Kaia Roman. We're here today to talk about ketamine for divorce, depression, and dependency. And we had an part of that overlapped for the two of us going through a divorce during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And finding ketamine was something that really helped our healing process. Able to touch on that too.
Thanks.
I know our
Sure.
listeners would love to hear.
I really appreciate the opportunity.
45 minutes until,
Okay.
40 minutes from now.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, so if you just want to start, speak freely about your story, and then
Okay.
I'll ask questions at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, April, for inviting me to come along on this journey with you and to speak about my ketamine experience, which is something that I really enjoy speaking about because people have so many questions usually, even though ketamine has been in the news more and there are way more clinics than there were a few years ago. It's still very unknown and stigmatized, still a lot of misunderstandings about what it is, how it works, all the normal questions. Is it addictive? All the things. So I love being able to share my story. I love being able to answer those questions. I know you mentioned that you read my book, The Joy Plan. I really consider myself to be a researcher and a serial entrepreneur. So I've started many businesses and I wrote The Joy Plan, which is told in a memoir style, but it's really about the neuroscience of joy, hopefully told in a way that inspires other people to put simple practices into place in their lives so that they can hack their brain to experience more joy. I wrote that after an epigenetic software company that I started did not succeed. And so I was in the opposite state of joy and really just was taking notes on what I was doing as a researcher to try and feel better. And those notes became a book. And that book was the gateway to many amazing things that have happened in my life since then. It ended up being on the Today Show for an entire week. The anchors of the Today Show followed some of the exercises in the Joy Plan for a week and talked about it. I got a lot of invitations to try different experiences because of my writing, and at the time I was a journalist. One of the experiences that I was invited to come and try was a retreat center in Costa Rica to have a free week. Yoga, massages, cleanses, life coaching, and something called plant medicine. And I was like, oh, cool, plants like ginger, garlic. I use plant medicine. I had no idea actually that I was going to be drinking ayahuasca, which is a psychedelic tea brewed in the Amazon. That was my first introduction to psychedelic medicine. This was in 2017, right after my book came out. It really blew my mind when I saw this door that opens when you have a psychedelic experience. I also started obsessively researching what happened to my brain during that experience. I realized that all the things that I wrote about in the Joy Plan would be so much easier to achieve if you could create a state of extra neuroplasticity, which happens after a psychedelic experience. So I know today that we're going to talk about the topic of divorce, and this is my long-winded way of getting into that. But after my psychedelic, I'd say, awakening, I was like, hey, husband, are you going to be on this journey with me? Because it's pretty hard to pick someone in your early 20s and say, we're going to be on this journey for the rest of our lives together. You can hope, you can dream, but if you're not growing on the same path, you will grow apart. And that happens in more than 50% of marriages, right? So in my case, we grew apart. We went on very different paths. I was really interested in continuing to grow and expand. And then we found ourselves in lockdown in this house together while we had already started this divorce process. So it was all very stressful. But I had a friend who I was talking to about ayahuasca and how amazing that journey had been for me. And he said, you should really try ketamine because it's like the short, beautiful part of the ayahuasca journey without the purging, without the darkness, without the preparation, without the hours of experience or going to another country. But it can really provide relief. And at that time, I desperately needed relief. So that is how I came to try ketamine in a clinic in Miami.
And what type of clinic?
I actually, as a researcher, I asked them to give me both. So I had 2 IVs and 2 intermuscular injections over the course of 8 days. And I personally really liked the intermuscular injection better because when you are having the IV, you have that needle the whole time. So I was aware of it and it made me uncomfortable. I just wanted to see what's the difference in the experience. And there is quite a big, it's a tricky thing with ketamine, getting the dosage exactly right so that somebody dissociates, but they don't go so deep that they don't remember anything. It's fine if you don't remember anything, you still get the brain benefits, but I think the ideal ketamine experience is when you dissociate, but you also come back remembering all of the insights that you received. And I think it was fun for them too at this ketamine clinic to have me being like, okay, let's test this dosage because I was like their guinea pig too.
Have you done the at-home ketamine lozenges as well?
Yes, I have. So actually, my first ketamine experience in the clinic was in January of 2020, right before the pandemic. I flew to Florida to have these treatments, and then I came back to California and ended up in this lockdown. I think that if I hadn't had the ketamine, which gave me so much relief from the just anxiety and turmoil that I was experiencing going through my divorce, I don't know how I would have survived then finding myself on lockdown in a house with my husband who I was separating from. But then I sent him to get ketamine treatment as well. And I think it really helped both of us quite a bit. These same friends of mine who had told me you should try ketamine in a clinic were consultants for a lot of ketamine clinics around the country. And at that time, during the pandemic, all the ketamine clinics had to shut down because it was COVID and everything was shutting down. So all these people who relied on ketamine to help them with their depression and their anxiety and just being able to manage life couldn't get their medicine. These services exist where you can, if you get the dosage right in a lozenge and you have someone in your home making sure that you're safe and you have a nurse over telemedicine watching over you, you can actually pretty closely replicate the experience that you would have in a clinic. But when you're depressed, it's pretty hard to leave your house. So you can do it in the comfort of your home and also reduce the cost. I think now I've seen thousands of people have really profound results from it. So I'm definitely a believer.
Yeah. I would like, because I think you will be one of the few people that I speak with that has had ketamine administered ways.
Yeah.
And you understand the brain science in terms of dosing and the state that you're able to achieve at higher doses and the benefits to that. So if you could speak a testimonial on the 3 types of administrations, and
Sure.
then what are you compromising? Because I've only done the at-home lozenges.
Yeah.
So what am I not getting if I'm not getting to the higher doses, potentially?
Yeah. I'll speak first to the infusion, which I think is the standard of care. And that is what most clinics use. You have a needle in your arm and it's giving you a amount of ketamine. Usually they'll mix in an anti-nausea medication too, which is nice. I think it's easier for them to control the dosing that way because they can actually monitor your eye movements to see if you're dissociating. They can give you more or they can dial it back. Let's say you go for half an hour and then they see you're coming back, they can up the dosage. So that one is a little bit easier to control.
What are your eye movements if you're beginning to dissociate?
Apparently, it's very rapid movement, like an REM
Okay.
type movement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
My experience with the infusion is that it came on quite quickly. I dissociated, and it's hard to describe what that feeling is, but the best I can describe it is it's like you're floating outside of your body, and you go to this place where you don't totally remember who you are or where you are. It's very peaceful. And then if you have the wherewithal to remember your intention, or you want to process something that you're looking for some relief or some answers from, in that floaty space, your mind is still present. So you can bring those thoughts or those intentions there and work on it, like workshop it. So I do remember having some really cool visions and insights in that space, and it was able to hold me in a dissociated state, but I was able to come back and remember everything. For that reason, the infusion was really nice. The dosing, I feel like, was perfect for me. However, I was very aware of this needle in my arm the whole time. So for that reason, I didn't like it. And then when I had the intramuscular injection, it quite similar, but without the needle. So I liked it better. However, it was a little harder to control the dosage. You blast off really fast. And if the dosage is too high, in my case, I would go. I know that I had a profound experience, but when I came back, I didn't remember anything. It's still quieting the default mode network. It's still stimulating the growth of new dendrites in the brain. It's still working on the glutamate receptors. It's still doing all the good brain stuff, but I do like to remember my experiences. So I think I would try an intramuscular injection again and try to determine what the ideal dosage is with that one, because if maybe I had a slightly lower dose, I would be able to remember the experience. But I know the clinicians have told me that can be a challenge, is getting people to have a high enough dose to dissociate, but a low enough dose that they remember. Now, compare that to the lozenge. The challenge with the lozenge is usually getting a high enough dose, because when you are taking something orally, and the lozenges that we use at KetaMD, they're called a troche. They're look like a little starburst. They melt in your mouth. We have people hold them in their mouth for 10 minutes, and that's called sublingual administration. Sublingual administration, compared to those other ones that are going straight into the bloodstream, it's only about 25% bioavailability. So if you're taking a 200 milligram troche, you're maybe getting 50 milligrams of ketamine, whereas an injection might be 150 milligrams of ketamine. And a lot of times people, clinicians, doctors, they're not wanting to prescribe really high dose troches because they don't, if people are doing it at home, they don't want them passing out or getting nauseous or whatever. I've found for myself a dosage that can dissociate with a lozenge and create an ideal experience. It's a pretty short experience, which for most people is great. It doesn't have to take up a whole day. Some people want to have a longer experience too. So there's just some contrasting differences between them. But the amazing thing is the effect on the brain, which is the same regardless of the route of administration, except for nasal ketamine, which people do in a party setting. And it actually can cause some addictive responses and be just like very harsh to put that compound directly into the brain in that way. So I definitely don't recommend it in that way.
So there is the only FDA approved S-ketamine drug. Spravato is a nasal spray.
Yes.
So that's interesting because that is exactly how it's being administered after hours underground. I had not, in my research, I didn't find what you just explained about how you're hitting your opioid receptors first. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that distinction is going to be very important for people. I was terrified of ketamine because of its addictive properties. I didn't want to go near it. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously I was choosing it because I found myself with a dependency to cannabis.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would love to hear the science behind that.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, just to speak on Spravato and the S-ketamine molecule, ketamine has been around since 1970, and you can't patent it. It's a crystal. It's very abundant. It's easy to make from some natural elements. It can't be patented. So for any pharmaceutical company to be able to make money from ketamine, they had to make what's called a mirror molecule, a synthetic version. That's why it's S-ketamine. It's a synthetic version of ketamine, and then they could patent that. And this Spravato, which costs something like thousands of dollars for a tiny little bottle that you have to squirt in your nose in the presence of, I believe, a psychiatrist. It's a very low dose, and it's not a dissociative dose. And I have spoken to people who have become addicted to liquid ketamine that they were prescribed from their doctor. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a brain scientist. I'm just like a novice researcher. But what I've been told, because I have conversations about this all day long with people, that I just geek out on this stuff. I have been told that there are opiate receptors at the top of the nasal canal. And actually, anything that you sniff up your nose will activate those opiate receptors and create an addictive response. And then I've also been told that when the ketamine enters through the blood-brain barrier in that route of administration, it's very harsh. It hits way too fast and it metabolizes extremely quickly as well. So it's not actually effective as a medical treatment doing it in that way. And I think it's important because with all this information coming out about ketamine, it's pretty cheap, honestly, to buy powder ketamine that you sniff. And there could be people out there that are like, oh, great, this is like a treatment for my depression. Let me just do that. I'm hopeful that treatments in a clinic and at-home ketamine treatment with lozenges will become more and more affordable. But really, this is a medicine, and it's a medicine that is affecting your neural pathways, and it needs to be taken in the right set, which is mindset, with an intention and with the right setting, which is not in a party atmosphere and in a place where you feel safe and where you're being guided or watched over by someone where you feel safe. And under those conditions, you have the best chance of having the best outcome. And then there's also integration support, because what happens with ketamine is it creates this burst of new dendrites. And dendrites are like the little baby brain cells that we're creating new neurons or brain cells all the time. And then it's like freshly driven snow, and you get to form how those dendrites are going to connect together and form neural pathways. Thoughts or actions that we repeat over and over again, and then they become habitual. So after a ketamine treatment, you have this window of opportunity where you can create new neural pathways on purpose to stop using a substance that you might feel you've become addicted to, or stop feeling so sad, or stop having these intrusive. I definitely recommend working with an integration coach, or some people like ketamine assisted therapy, which doesn't necessarily mean you're talking to the therapist while you're on the ketamine journey. It can mean you're combining therapy with your ketamine journeys. So you create this state of extra neuroplasticity, and then you work with your therapist. I think some form of support is just absolutely essential for these treatments to be as effective as they can be.
That is so helpful. The way that you described the snow, the new snow, and what's happening in the brain when we introduce psychedelics into the picture. It's really interesting. So ketamine is a dissociative, right? You just explained that at home, the doses are not really that high in order to dissociate. It feels true to me. I've never consumed ketamine. When you were describing it earlier, it sounded like that twilight period when you take a sleeping pill.
Well, ketamine is an anesthetic. They use it in surgery to put people to sleep. So it is that beginning phase when you start to leave, but then you stay right there. And if you've dissociated, you would know it, because it's pretty remarkable to actually forget who you are and forget where you are.
Great.
Something like PTSD or anxiety or depression, that is a huge relief. Even just to get 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 45 minutes of I'm not connected to my problems right now, then when you come back, that relief can be sustained. And yes, you're not afraid because it's blissful. I had the opportunity to work with the basketball player, former Kardashian family member, Lamar Odom, and sit with him many times during his ketamine treatments. And he describes it as going to heaven. And he was addicted to cocaine for many years, famously. And it wasn't until he did ketamine treatments and did an ibogaine treatment down in Mexico that he was finally able to stop his addiction. But yeah,
Yeah.
just as an aside, it's a very peaceful experience.
So, what I wanted to ask is I was concerned because the audience that I really speak to is women and your interests, I believe. And when I think of dissociation, I think of people that I've known that have had sexual trauma, and that is how
Mm.
they experience a sexual encounter
Yeah, yes. And I
post.
can relate
And
to
so,
that as well.
so that was my concern is
Mm.
that we are shipping lozenges to women, and then they find themselves alone, dissociating, and
Mm.
they're triggered, right? So I was talking to a woman who is the director of Field Trip Health here in Seattle, Dr. Bridget Carnahan. She's a guest on this season of the show, and she was saying, yeah, you would definitely want to have your therapist lined up. Or actually, maybe it was Lauren Swanson who said that from WonderMed. And it just felt like to me that should be on the homepage,
Yeah, interesting.
right? But if you can't dissociate, if you're saying that's the likelihood of that is quite slim with these lozenges, then maybe it's not as much of a concern. But I do hope that is something that when you're having a screening to have an infusion or to have intramuscular injection that they're talking to you about, this could bring up.
And those memories. Yeah, let me speak to that a little bit. First of all, I hope that no at-home ketamine company is encouraging or giving the okay for people to do this at home alone. I don't think that anybody should do it. Everybody should have someone with them that they feel safe with. And like with Keta MD, we have a nurse over telemedicine watching people, taking their blood pressure ahead of time, watching them, monitoring their breathing, checking their vital signs after. I think that's the safest. Then with the dissociation, it's actually unknown how important it is for the effect. There's in the scientific community and the medical community some disagreement about whether the dissociation is important or not. There have been some studies that say one way yes and one way no. For me personally, I just think it's a pretty amazing experience. And when you want to dislocate from, say, negative thoughts, it is essential. However, also speaking as a person who has experienced sexual trauma and dissociated during that experience, I can only speak from my own experience. They're two very different things. It's not the same kind of dissociation. Yes, in dissociation, you float above your body, but it's very different to float above your body because of what's happening is unsafe, and to float above your body because you're like merging with God. And actually, I think that could be very healing for the dissonance of the previous dissociative experience. And I'm only one person who is not a doctor or official researcher. I just have a lot of conversations with people about their ketamine experiences. And given that so many women, unfortunately, have had some kind of sexual trauma, I would have thought that somebody would have brought that up to me at this point, because I literally ask people, tell me your ketamine experience. Like I ask people to tell me their birth stories. I just love it. I love hearing these stories. I love hearing people's psychedelic medicine stories. And so I've heard probably thousands of these stories, and nobody has ever brought that up. I think it's an amazing point. I'm really glad. I actually hadn't considered it before, but I can just speak from my own experience. It was not triggering for me in that way at all. The kind of dissociation that you have with ketamine is like a exhale. It's like a relief, like you can let go. You're not escaping something. You're letting go. You're surrendering to something beautiful. So it's a different vibe.
So your ketamine treatment was when you had your treatment, had you spoken with your now ex-husband about the fact that this was going to be happening, or you had the ketamine treatment and then came home and said, I want to do this?
When I went to do the ketamine treatment, he knew because I had to go to Florida and leave him with the kids. So he knew that's what I was going to do. And he knew that I was struggling. I was suicidal. And that was the main thing that I had heard. Ketamine can break suicidal ideation immediately, like more than anything. It's an awful feeling. If anyone out there who's listening has ever been in that state where like your rational mind knows that would be really stupid to kill myself. Like I've got kids. I'm sure there's great things still ahead of me in my life. I have a lot going for me, but then you just really don't want to live. It's terrible. And he and I were going through a divorce, but he didn't want me to kill myself. So I was like, look, I think I need to go do this. And he was supportive of me doing it. And actually, he was willing to go and do it himself after he saw how it helped me. So I think that was great. I think that really helped our divorce, actually, both of us, to be able to get through it. They list divorce as one of the most stressful life activities, right? The most stressful life experiences that we can ever go through. And I think there was a lot of us, like divorce rates skyrocketed during the pandemic because we're all stuck with each other. So yeah, now I can laugh at it.
Yeah.
So hard.
Our story
Yeah.
is similar in that we both had decided before that lockdown set in.
Right.
So I knew where this was going, and the only way to live through it was to live through it, right?
Yeah.
And to be there and be super present because there was no other change to be made. And yeah, that's a really humbling experience. Yeah.
Did you have your ketamine treatments during your divorce as well or after?
No. Yeah, so I moved out September 2021, and it wasn't until this September of 2022 that I had my first lozenge.
Okay.
I was called by WonderMed because they were curious if their lead clinician could be a guest on the show. And I had already been researching ketamine and was really concerned about the addictive qualities and wondering, like, how are these clinics just popping up everywhere? And what's the oversight here? And to hear what you said about ketamine was an opportunity for Johnson to have IP, right? And and for them to choose the route of administration that will get you addicted. That's not that surprising considering coming from a pharmaceutical company. Oh, it's so frustrating.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can imagine I was not thinking that anyone's really on the side of the patient.
Yeah.
But I had done enough research where I knew that there was an opportunity for me to really reset my relationship with cannabis. With alcohol, when I was suicidal after the birth of my second son, and I was sober, I'd been sober for a year, and I had not been diagnosed with ADHD yet, is what was happening. Postpartum. So I understand thinking about suicide, to think about this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Meditation saved me at that point, but ketamine saved me this past fall when I didn't realize that I was suffering from what I would call high functioning depression. How could I not be? I'd moved out of my family house. I had my partner since I was 22, so for 23 years. We're no longer together. Broken his heart, and I've broken my kid's heart. It's just, my heart's broken. So I poured myself into work. So, that it was able to just to mask what was really going on. But ketamine, it was like after the second treatment, Kaia, it was as if I had windshield wipers to my brain. And I realized just how depressed it was. So obvious.
Wow.
The before and after. I couldn't believe it. That I was living in that state. Yeah. And you know what I've learned this winter is it's not something where you do it and you feel great and you're done.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a series. I need to.
Yeah.
That is, you are starting to manage your mental health. You're not curing anything, right? And ketamine is a tool that you can turn to. You don't have to do, it's not try it once and then you're done. So if you could talk a little bit about what you've learned in terms of protocols and regimens that you've seen people.
First of all, just thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm like brought to tears by it. And I think it's so important for women like us to share these things. People could look at us and be like, oh, you're successful, you're whatever. You thought of, you were suicidal, you battled addiction, heartbreak almost took you down. Yes, these are hard, horrible human experiences. And thank goodness there are tools that can help us. And that's why I do the work that I do too, because I want as many people to know about these tools and to know how to use. But it is important for people to understand that ketamine is not some kind of magic bullet, like you have one treatment and then everything is solved forever. The Yale protocol for treatment-resistant depression is 6 treatments within 2 to 3 weeks, because you really have to hit those already formed very strong neural pathways. If you've been in a state of depression for a long time, it's going to take a lot of ketamine to totally rewire that brain. And different people are wired in different ways. Some of us have a very strong negativity bias or a very strong amygdala activity. That means you're like in a state of fight or flight more often than others, often based on the trauma that you experienced in childhood or even the trauma that you hold in your DNA from your ancestors. My grandmother's a Holocaust survivor. I've got some massive trauma in my DNA. I know that my tendency is I can feel better for some period of time, and then I'm going to need a booster treatment. And the thing about those booster treatments is it really varies from person to person how often people need them, but most people need them, especially if they're getting off of all their other medications, which is really common. Once people discover that ketamine works for them, they can get off of their sleeping medications, their anxiety medications, their ADHD medications, their antidepressants, but they might find they need a ketamine treatment once a month, or they need a ketamine treatment once every 3 months. Some people once every 6 months. The only way to know is to monitor yourself and have that level of self-awareness that you notice your symptoms coming back. Or, of course, it's helpful if you are speaking with a therapist or a coach, and then there's somebody else who's helping you monitor. But in my experience working with and guiding and just speaking to lots of people about protocols and helping to develop the protocols for Keta MD, is most people need 4 to 6 treatments pretty close together in the beginning. And then they wait. They see how they're doing. Most people feel a lot better. And it's funny. It can be subtle. They can be like, yeah, I feel a lot better. Maybe it's because I like started juicing, or maybe it's because I read this really good book and don't necessarily even see that it was the ketamine. But if you only do the ketamine and you don't change anything else, then it'll be more obvious. Most people, it's like from the outside, it's really obvious. They are like a totally different person. And then you have to watch for those signs that start creeping back in. If it's depression, those days when you're just like having a hard time getting out of bed, if it's anxiety and those intrusive thoughts, you will notice them. You're part of my club. PTSD or addiction or whatever it is, and then just get on top of getting the booster. Don't put it off, because these are just brain patterns. But honestly, I wrote my book, The Joy Plan, about biohacking your brain to experience joy. And that's literally what these tools are. Ketamine and other psychedelics are tools that we can use to biohack our brains to experience joy. And what I love about ketamine is that it's so safe. It has pretty much no side effects. It has a very short half-life. It's only in the body for 24 hours, acutely only for a couple hours. And it's, yeah, just a very benign substance. It doesn't interact. You don't have to go off of any of your other medications to take it. So it really works for just about anyone. The only people that can't use ketamine are people with uncontrolled high blood pressure or some kind of condition in their eyes with extra pressure, like glaucoma. Otherwise, it's very available to most people. So I really like it, but it is a tool that needs to be used properly.
Yes. I think medical expertise is required for sure.
Yeah.
And it's fine at home, I think, is really convenient. And as long as you feel supported, like through Keta MD and having a platform, fine. For someone else on someone else on the premise.
I think it's a great way to make it more affordable, make it more accessible.
Yeah.
And I think that the reason why so many more clinics have opened and at-home services have started is because it works. There's just a demand for it because it works. Yeah, as long as people are being safe. Anybody who's doing these treatments at home, don't do a ketamine treatment and then get in your car and drive. Take some time to recover. Make sure there's somebody who can help you go to the bathroom right after in case you're like light on your feet or dizzy. Have some anti-nausea medication on hand in case you have a seasickness type nausea after the treatment. Few things, but like it's pretty safe.
Yes, it's really good to hear you say that. It felt safe.
after I realized I was not going to become addicted to it. It felt
Yeah,
safe.
it's used to fight addiction. Ketamine has never been found to be addictive administered in those ways.
Yet it's a Schedule III drug.
Well, we could talk about all
substance.
the improper scheduling of different compounds.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because cannabis, ibogaine, for example, ibogaine, which is the one substance on earth that will get rid of a heroin addiction in 24 hours, fights addiction. And it's a horrifying, super intense experience that you would not want to do multiple times. So it's like the least addictive substance on earth. And it's on Schedule I for being a highly addictive substance with no medical benefit. So the schedule is not accurate and needs to be revisited.
It's interesting. It feels like it's the most intense outcome, Schedule I, right?
And if you're ready to dive deeper into the world of ketamine, be sure to check out the show notes to link to SetSet's comprehensive ketamine guide, a clinician-backed resource available in both PDF and audio that covers candidate criteria, dosing, methods of administration, contraindications, science, history, and more. The SetSet website has this resource available for purchase and download, as well as DIY guides for psilocybin and microdosing. Thank you for joining me for today's episode.